Welcome back. In this episode we're going to do a little bit of frame restoration, mount a hidden tow package, and put on a new roll pan. So let's take a look at what we got.
Back from the dead.
So as you can see, obviously I've already taken off the old bumper. It was pretty rusted out underneath. So I went ahead and pulled that off. Had to cut most of the bolts off to get it out of there. Cut off the old brackets. And I even started to clean up the frame a little bit. The back usually is the worst. And I'm only just going to go up to, you know, just above, maybe a little bit above the, or in front of the axle. Not too far up. It actually is in pretty good shape up there. I mean, it's just a little bit of surface rust. I'll do that, you know, sometime in the future. But since I'm already doing some work back here before I put on the tow package, I'd like to get it cleaned up, put on some rust bullet so you can, I mean, it's, you know, it's pretty solid. There was a little bit of shelling, but you know, it's really solid. There's one spot that I have to weld, and it's not that gap right up here. It's not this piece up in here. That's just how they are. But it's down in here. You can kind of see where it broke away. Other than that, that's the only spot that needs cleaned up and welded. So I'll be cleaning that up, welding that. Everything else, I'm just going to use an angle grinder with some wire wheels on them, and just clean everything up. Use some mineral spirits and wipe it all down real good, and then run some rust bullet over it, and then we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and get this cleaned up and do the best we can and try to keep this truck going as long as we can. So we got the frame cleaned up pretty good. Not too bad. Got all the loose stuff taken off. And there's the section I had to weld in. Normally I don't weld that bad, but my MIG's having problems with the wire feed wheel. It's not consistent on feeding the wire through, so it gummed it up real bad. But the weld itself on there solid, it just looks ugly, so I'm just going to leave it, and we'll fix the welder some other day. Here's some of the stuff I've used. I used a hammer and a file. The file's nice because it fits in some tight spots on top of the frame rail. Plus, I used it as a chisel as well to chisel off some of that mill scale. It worked really well. It took a long time, but you got to get it off. Then you've got your wire brushes, a couple different sizes. Small one helps get in some tight corners there. A couple different wire wheels. Hook those up to the grinder. Then the regular grinding disc on there. Sand blaster. I used that just for a short while in some really tight areas. It makes a hell of a mess. It puts that blast media all over the place. But it's nice to get in some corners with that nozzle on there. So we used it for a short while. And definitely a respirator and some safety goggles. Respirator, you don't want to be breathing in that stuff that's blowing all over under there. And trust me when I say that stuff is going everywhere, as far as rust and dirt and just all kinds of stuff. You don't want that breathing in. Then safety goggles, I recommend these definitely over safety glasses, because you'll have stuff falling behind the front and you don't want that going in your eyes. So these are a little bit safer with what you're working with. Then the mineral spirits, put that in your spray bottle and you can spray it on any surface that you need clean, prepping before you paint, and then wipe it down with microfiber cloth. Works really well. But before I use the mineral spirits, I used the air compressor and blew off a lot of the loose stuff. So I highly recommend using your air compressor before the mineral spirits. And it just gets off a lot of the grease and dirt and everything that you don't want. But you're going to want to wait till that dries before you use the rust bullet or whatever inhibitor you might be using. So everything cleaned up pretty good for the most part. This, as you can see, it's the original coating that's actually still on there. But we'll go ahead and get that rust bullet on there, and we're going to use the spray gun to start. Then there's going to be some areas that we're going to have to use a brush to brush it on. So, and here's the rust bullet. I only bought a small one, just a 1 quart, and it's just a good rust inhibitor. I've heard nothing but good things about it, so we're going to give it a shot and see how well it works and how long it lasts on this old truck. So we got the rust bullet on here, and seems to have sealed up pretty nice. Everything's nice and solid. Instead of using an air gun, I went ahead and used a paintbrush. My paint gun was a gravity feed hopper, and it was just going to be difficult to get underneath here and do that with the hopper on top of the gun. So I went ahead and used a brush, which is a little bit easier to put on in the corners anyways. The only thing is, if you're using a brush, make sure you're using a brush that you don't really care about, that you're just going to be done with after this, because you're not going to get it cleaned out and you're just going to do this job and throw it away. So, and on top of that, use either a metal can or a glass jar to put this stuff in. That way you can put the lid back on the canister so that you're not drying the rest of your rust bullet up. Don't use a solo cup, it'll eat right through it. I made that mistake. And then put probably at least 2 to 3 coats on. That's what they recommend, a minimum of 2 to 3 coats. I did 2 coats. 1 definitely was not enough. And then the dry time between coats would be 2 to 6 hours. I did about 2 to 2.5 hours between, and it worked out fine. If you go much more than that, especially if you go 12 hours or more between coats, you're going to have to sand this back down to get your next coat to stick. And then total curing time is roughly, if the temperature's right, roughly around 72 hours, which is 3 days. And that's where we are now. So 2 to 3 coats, 2 to 6 hours between coats, and then 3 days total curing time. And once again, this stuff's pretty potent, so if you get it on yourself, you're going to have a heck of a time getting it off. I got a little bit on my fingers and a little bit on my knee, and I tried using rubbing alcohol. I've tried using some of that orange stuff that, you know, just gets grease and stuff off of you because it's got some grit in it. I've tried using mineral spirits. Nothing got it off, so just going to let time kind of do its thing. But it goes on pretty good. It's not real thick. It actually is kind of a thinner paint. But you want to make sure, like in the corners and all along the sides, you get it on there pretty good. Not so that it runs, but just enough coats so that it completely covers what you're painting over. That way it keeps all the water and oxygen out. That helps fight the rust from coming back through. And this is pretty solid stuff too. I mean, it's, you know, this stuff's pretty durable and hard. Some of the stuff that I used to clean up and whatnot that had this on there that it dried on was pretty solid. So this stuff seems like really nice stuff, you know, especially from what I've heard as well. So, but let's go ahead and get this tow package on, since this is all cured and ready to go. Now this tow package is going to bolt in 6 points, 3 points on each frame rail on the bottom of the frame. You got this hole right here, skip the one and then go to this one, and then you're going to bolt into this as well, and it's going to have a washer to fill that hole too. And then you got the exact same thing on the other frame rail. So what we're going to do is get that all bolted on and see how it looks. So here's the tow package all bolted on. Really easy to install. You can see on each frame rail you'd have 3 bolts there. And what they do is they'll give you, you got these spacers here. Then you run a carriage bolt down through the top of the spacer, through the frame rail, and then it goes down through your tow package, and then the nut just threads onto the carriage bolt, and that's it. What I originally did was I used impact gun to tighten them up, and then I used my torque wrench to get it to 110 foot-pounds, because that's what the instructions called for. The only thing with that is when I used the torque wrench, this spacer ended up spinning, and it chipped a little bit of the rust bullet on both of these ones. The other ones it didn't really do that on. But if I had to do over, I'd just use the impact gun and just tighten them down really tight. But I went ahead and went back and loosened them up and adjust the spacers and just use my impact gun just to tighten them back down. But that's up to you. If you want to just go ahead and get it right to torque spec, go for it. But just to be on the safe side, you can see I ended up just putting the rust bullet on the carriage bolt and on the spacers and just sealed it all up, just to make sure it's sealed real nice and everything, especially since it chipped the rust bullet on the frame there. So went ahead and touched that up. These tow packages got quite a bit of weight to them. They're not ridiculously heavy, but it would be easier to have 2 people putting this thing on, one to help hold it up and align it with the bolts. Since it goes onto the bottom, it's not resting on top. But if you're doing it by yourself like I did, you can just rest it on your knee, or if you wanted to, you could use a floor jack, I'm sure, just to kind of put it up in the air and balance it and get everything threaded on there. That way you can go ahead and start torquing it down and tightening it up. The other thing was, it came with, you can see, a small carriage bolt here with a nut, and this would be for if you had a ground wire that you wanted to connect to it. My ground wire, it's got rust bullet all over it and everything, but I didn't see a point in removing it, so I just left it up there. And if you wanted, you could actually put it over here on the other side too. But that's all there really is to it. It's pretty easy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this roll pan that's going to cover this whole back section here. So this is the roll pan we'll be working with. I've seen several videos on how people are installing these. There's definitely a lot of misconception about how it should be done. So I'm going to go ahead and go in a little more depth on this than I had initially planned. And we're going to cut this video into 2 parts. This is going to conclude part 1. Part 2, we're going to cover the prep work, the install, and the finishing touches on this. So if you have any questions on what we've done so far, just send me a comment. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Other than that, I'll see you on the next episode.